Welcome, everybody. My name is Marlon Ruiz, and I'm super excited to host this week's Fireside Chat. Our special guest today is Charles Hoskinson. Before we get into our chat, let's go ahead and do a little bit of background on Charles. Charles is currently the CEO and founder of Input Output Global. He also made time to go give his congressional testimony recently around digital asset regulation. So thank you, Charles, for doing that. In the before time, he was also a founder of Invictus Innovations, Bitcoin Foundation's Education Committee, and also a co-founder of Ethereum. Welcome to Charles. Thank you for joining us today.
It's wonderful to be here, Marlon. I have so much admiration and respect for Google, and I always love speaking before Googlers. We have a lot of ex-Googlers at I/O, enough to love OKRs and BRDs and TRDs. So some of your cultures come our way.
Gotcha. Yeah, our culture is fantastic. So thank you for that positive feedback. Really appreciate it. To start out today's talk, I kind of want to know, are you in sunny Colorado or sometimes sunny Colorado?
Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. I'm actually currently in my office in Longmont, and I have the fake fireplace. We got the lobster. I got my my happopus right here. See the happy octopus? And this tells you what type of day it's going to be, because when you flip it around, it's actually a satopus. So it's a happopus day.
All right, let's do the happopus instead. I like that. And I do love the fireplace. Thanks for turning that on for our fireside chat. Fantastic. So we usually like to get started with personal story, how you got into crypto. I recently learned that you actually were a teacher for Bitcoin. So how did you stumble into that assignment? And is that what kind of took you forward into this space?
Yeah, I was part of that lost generation that got so apathetic and cynical with the world, and I was looking for some way to get out of it. So I liked math and cryptography, and I worked on the Ron Paul campaign. And so those factors together, they made me really want new money. And then Bitcoin came out in 2009, and I discovered it in 2010 with the Slashdot wave. And I said, boy, that's really interesting. And it's not going to work, but it's really cool. Because, the Ron Paul movement, we had our own monies. There's like the Liberty Dollar and these other things. And all the people who did that went to jail, or they got very strongly worded letters from the Treasury Department saying you should stop doing that. So I said, this whole thing. Oh, but it's got, it's peer-to-peer. It's got an anonymous founder. So I mined a lot of it. I had this beautiful rig of these AMD 5850s. And, I got the nice board. I was running 1.2 gigahashes, in an AMD setup. And I traded, and I managed to scrape up about 50,000 Bitcoin, which at the time was basically worthless. And I wish I held on to those Bitcoin, but that's been a recurring story in my life. Right around 2013, I said, after Bitcoin, after the Cypriot crisis, I said, Bitcoin's not only here to stay, I think it is going to change the world. So I created the Bitcoin Education Project, and I started networking with everybody. And I created all these Udemy classes and these other things. We pontificated, like, what would the world need to look like for $10,000 Bitcoin? And why is Bitcoin interesting and exciting? Right around the same time, I read this amazing book out of Cornell called Networks, Crowds, and Bits. And it talked about the combination of social media and networks and decentralization and peer-to-peer and all these factors that came together, and how it's going to transform our economy, and how every business professional needs to understand this. I think it was published in 2011. I read it probably 2012 or something like that. I started meeting everybody through the Bitcoin Education Project. I met Andreas Antonopoulos and Mike Hearn and Eric Voorhees and Roger Ver, who were big guys back then. I was just a little guy. Nobody fucking cared about me, and then Bitcoin Foundation started coming together. Peter Vicini set it up, and it was like, hey, we need to get organized. So they did the San Jose conference in May. And then I got involved on the education committee side and tried to help them build some Creative Commons open source materials. Just what is hashing? What's a script transaction? How does UTXO work? All these types of things, just to basically kind of explain it. Around that time, one of my students, they said, hey, I really like what you're doing. His name was Li Shai Lao. And he's like, oh, by the way, I'm a VC in China, and I just want to give you like $300,000 to start something. And I said, I've been down this road before. You're a prince, right? It's like, okay. But it turned out he's a legit guy, and he gave me $300,000. So I went to Bitcoin Talk, and I called it Project Invictus. I said, what could we do for the cryptocurrency space to make us undefeatable? And I had a bimodal distribution, but had one grouping of people, one cluster, wanted to do decentralized exchange, because at the time everybody was very worried about Mt. Gox. And then the other group of people, they wanted to do a stable coin because everybody hated the volatility. Bitcoin went from $4 to 250 down to 80, then back to 100 for a bit, then up to 1200. So it's like, we need to do something to solve this. So I started BitShares with Dan Larimer. He was the first person to reply on the list, and he went on and had his own career. He did Steemit, EOS, and all these other things, and he's kind of a controversial figure. And I got so tired of working there, I took a buyout, went to Ethereum, and obviously they didn't like me too much. So there's books written about it, and careful what you read.
I'm waiting for the movie, by the way. No, I'm sorry.
Oh, actually, it's being made. It's coming out in 2024. I said I'm okay with it as long as Jack Black doesn't play me. But anyway, that'll be fun. So I at some point I said I got to need to do my own thing. So I started Input Output in 2015, and I said it'd be a lot of fun to roll up my passion for writing academic papers and hard engineering, so formal methods and use of functional programming techniques, and put these things together and actually build out the corpus of the science of the cryptocurrency space. And we kind of said, let's do a third generation cryptocurrency. Bitcoin's the first, Ethereum is the second generation. Third has scalability, interoperability, and governance, which are necessary to actually reach large scale adoption and be useful to people and survive and change, as people have learned. So it's been a wild ride. I've been in and out for over 12 years, professionally for almost 10. I've seen everything from Silk Road and Mt. Gox to BitConnect and OneCoin to all the corruption exchanges, the rise of Doge again, all the Bitcoin killers, and then the ETH killers, and now the Cardano killers. And had a lot of fun. We've written 169 papers. We have a lab at Stanford, at CMU. We have a formal math institute, place at University of Edinburgh, University of Athens, Tokyo Tech. Over 10,000 citations in the portfolio. We do some deep work in programming languages and distributed systems and zero knowledge cryptography, but a lot of economics work as well, like mechanism design and game theory, and we've even designed stable coins and these things. And then on the engineering side, we're most famous for Haskell, but we also write code in Rust and TypeScript and Scala and a little bit of Go here and there. You can't get away from that. And we've implemented a lot of very novel things throughout the years, millions of lines of code. And on the formal methods side, we do like hardcore Isabelle and Agda and Coq work. And, and actually the Formal Mathematics Institute is kind of taking lean to the next level. And we're slowly but surely rewriting math in a machine understandable format. So I guess ChatGPT can have an opinion on it, in a little bit. So it's been a pretty wild ride, I'd say.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for giving us that background. Kind of curious. I mean, knowing that you focused on Bitcoin, you saw proof of work, you saw USDO, you're like, hey, this could be done a little bit better, maybe. Like, can you talk a little bit about why you created Cardano and kind of that little bit about that path? I'm sure you could write 10 books on that, but maybe just a little TLDR for everybody to see, how you figured that out.
So we have there's three groupings of problems that demand new protocols. So the first is that these aren't really scalable systems. They're like tables, and the more people, the more chairs around the table, but you have the same amount of food. So whether you're proof of work or conventional proof of stake, there's a finiteness about what the network can do. So true scalability would be like BitTorrent, where more people, more power the system has, the more use the system has. So there's an intuitive notion to that. So at the time when we started Cardano, there's not a single consensus protocol that really understood how to accommodate that. And so we said, well, it'd be really cool to do a really deep research project to figure out the science of consensus. So first, the formal modeling. So we wrote the GKL paper, and we have more than 2,000 citations with it. And it really created a backbone protocol for describing how blockchains are secured by a consensus algorithm. Then once we had that, we'd say, well, what properties are important? Like, how do you keep time in these systems? So we wrote Ouroboros Chronos. And how do you be able to bootstrap from the Genesis block? And we wrote Ouroboros Genesis. And how do you put it in a semi-synchronous network model? So that's why we wrote Ouroboros Praus. How do you do this in an incentive compatible way? So that was the original Ouroboros paper. And then all the other things you want, like fast finality and so forth. So we've written probably a dozen or so papers, and it's been a lot of fun. But that alone has been a great exercise, because it really shows you kind of the state of the art of what can you do with these protocols, and can you get to a point where when you add more users, you get more capability. And as the price goes up, that it gets more decentralized. The problem with Bitcoin is it's the opposite relationship. As the price goes up, it gets more centralized because you have economy of scale around verticalized mining operations. So I have an incentive to create my own chips, go to subsidized power and build a $500 million data center and not share any of that technology. So like 5-10 pools control the whole show there, and that's problematic. The second category was the category of interoperability, and I was really interested in how do you do cross-blockchain communication, because we live in a world of blockchains, and it's when regulation gets better, Google and others will get involved inevitably because there's money to be made and interesting problems to be solved. So their stuff has to work with our stuff, and our stuff has to work with what Chase is doing with Onyx, and that has to work with what the European government is doing for a lot of their things, has to work with all the CBDCs that are coming, has to work with what Japan is doing with all their stuff with the FSA. So interoperability matters because you want to move users, information, value, and metadata and state information across chains. And one agent on one system has to be able to talk to another agent on another system and have a meaningful conversation, machine to machine or machine to human or some hybrid thereof. So there's a lot of great cool protocols, and you see these a lot in the zero knowledge space. And we wrote a paper called Mithril that we're using for Cardano, but there's like Cello and Plumo and these other things floating around that try to do it as part of that data availability problem that people think about. And then the third issue, governance, was actually the most fascinating to me. And actually, it's an area where Google actually has had a lot of experience. It's the same for Microsoft or any company. But when you build a product and you want to turn that product over to not you, but still use it, how do you do that as an open source program? Like, how does .NET actually become an open source program, even though it was like really in the DNA of Microsoft for a long time? Or how does Android really become a true open source project, or Dart or Go, or any of these things? And so to me, cryptocurrencies are this on steroids because Android doesn't have a token. So that creates a whole, it's both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you have voting resource and you can use that as a governance mechanism to make decisions, but it's a curse because you create polarization. So people who would ordinarily work together and collaborate actually have disincentives for doing that. So to me, it was really fun to explore governance concepts like preference ordering for voting and liquid feedback and liquid democracy. And also, how do you blend constitutions, institutions, and voting in such a way that your millions of users are able to run the show, manage a decentralized treasury, and converge to proper decision-making. Total anarchy like Bitcoin, it's resilient in that you can never change anything, but also it means that you're always going to be inferior because you can never change anything. So anytime you discover a flaw, like there's a flaw in the multi-sig script when I started, 2011, it's still there. In Bitcoin, you have to actually put things twice. And it's just like something Satoshi screwed up on, and they never got around to fixing it because it's too hard. And so it's almost like being told you have to like support Windows 3.1 forever. It's like at some point you have to move on. So you need a governance system in order to do that. It's very easy for Microsoft or Facebook or these other offers, because it's like, oh, let's go upgrade Facebook. It's like, okay, we'll just do a push. We can do it like 10 times a day if we want to. We control it. But when it's decentralized, how do you control a system like that? And that's actually a novel, interesting, ubiquitously useful problem for every government, every organization, every open source program, and cryptocurrencies are no different. So to me, it was very fun to be able to do all three of those, to be able to pursue something in scalability and do some real cool work there, something in interoperability and do some real cool work there, and then also do some work in governance. We also became programming language experts. We wrote several programming languages like Plutus and Marlowe, and a new accounting model, extended UTXO, and these were very hard challenges. And it was fun because we got to resurrect all these old white-bearded programming guys like Phil Wadler and the others who were pretty close to retirement. They'd already created Haskell and other programming languages. They had just massive experience behind them. And I said, hey, if you could do it all over again, would you like to come and like one last ride?
One last hurrah, yeah, get it going. One more time.
Exactly. And they came in and we had a lot of fun working with them. And they kind of know everybody because they all grew up with these people. Like Wadler actually worked with Vince Cerf, another Googler, when he was at Stanford as an undergrad. And he actually wrote the first online computer game because Vince said, hey, we need to test our links between these things. Can you write an application to do that? And Wadler's like, let's build a video game to do that, because he's like 19 years old at the time. Now he's like in his 60s, So we actually invited Vint to one of our events, and they reminisced on the old days way back when everybody was a lot younger in the pictures. So that's the other cool part of this job, is that you get to meet the old and the young. And I grew up reading Wadler's papers, and I was so excited to be able to actually collaborate with him and meaningfully contribute and do interesting things. The other thing is we became pretty good open source custodians. So Haskell was in a pretty rough state for commercialization. So we actually started working on GHC. We worked on using compilers for GHC to JS. So you can compile Haskell to JavaScript. We worked a lot on WebAssembly stuff. We helped with linear types in GHC. So it was really fun to be able to actually also contribute to open source projects and productize these things, especially on the Windows side of getting the Haskell development experience and the application experience a lot better. And we had a lot of challenges to overcome, and we still do. And that's my day in the life of me. I get to talk to our chief scientist in the morning, and we talk about academic things, and then I talk to our engineers in the afternoon, and we talk about a lot of technical stuff, and then I still have to make money. So I talk to the business people, and we're like, okay, how do we do that when the market's gone from 2.6 trillion to 800 billion, and everybody's having a tough time right now? What business models are still viable, and how do you do proper product development as well? We have a lot of great partners. We brought Carnegie Mellon University, for example. Not only do we do formal mathematics, we actually have a whole product development program we develop with them. And so every person who does products, they do a 6-month course, and they kind of co-design something with the university, and they learn a whole bunch of tools and techniques. And we also tried to build a pretty good component model within our organization. And so we have tribes and squads and chapters, and everybody gets to kind of be a hero in their own little domain. And it's fun to learn how to do all that, because when I started, I had no experience at all managing people. I was terrible at it. And I had to become better at it. I wouldn't say I'm the best, but it's just like John Carmack. If you put your head against the wall enough, eventually you get the damn thing working. And that's what we've been able to do with 700 people in 72 jurisdictions.
Well, thanks for not giving up.
I mean, what else would I do?
Exactly.
It's like I just like being abused. So it's like the way to go.
Yeah, that's thank you for that. That's interesting. I'd like to peel back a little bit more on Cardano itself, if we could talk about a few subjects around that.
Sure.
That I'd like to discuss. So one of them would be, decentralized identity. We have this world where nobody has identity really. You've got KYC with a central exchange, but that has its own problems, its own, holdbacks from an old era. How do you see, decentralized identity working, versus your sovereignty, and what does that look like for you in a perfect world where people can ID themselves in the right way for the right reason at the right time, but not just give away everything in that way?
It's interesting. So I've had a lot of conversations on this topic. I was in Israel at Eurocrypt, and we had Phil Zimmerman there. And I said, hey, what are we doing PGP2? We got to get this done, right? It's been a little long in the tooth, and there's a lot more cool stuff we can do, and let's make it post-quantum. And he said, well, I'll only do it if we can do Web of Trust the proper way. And I said, God, if you had one, imagine what the internet would look like. No usernames, no passwords. You just have challenge response protocols to log in, one-click account creation, and almost no hacking, no password managers, any of these things. And you just have little hardware devices, usually to manage your PGP, like YubiKeys or these things. It's just such a great user experience, and it's so secure, but it didn't win. So binding of identity to credentials. I also knew Manu Sporny and Chris Allen, and they were at the W3C with the DID program. And I met him in New York back in 2013, and he's like, we're going to do DIDs. We're fired up. We're excited. I was like, all right, well, in a few years, you'll make some progress. And then 2022 comes around, 2023. It's like, we finally have some adoption. Yay. It's been 10 years. It's really hard to develop standards for identity and get those to be industry adopted, because the issue is not technological. The issue is incentives. Google and Facebook and Microsoft and others have very strong incentives to internalize the identity product and own that, because then they have the ability to control your experience and access to the web. I'm not criticizing companies. It's just a competitive reality. Even if you're an open source company, you have that incentive. Governments also have that incentive. So you actually have a situation where the business actually may be at odds with the sovereign that the business lives under. And so historically, identity has been the product of governments, where they give you the breeder documents, whether it be a passport or driver's license or any of these types of things, and they are the issuer. But then there's this closely related concept to identity called reputation. So it's one thing to have a binary conversation. Are you Marlon or not? It's another thing entirely to have a reputation conversation. Is Marlon the most qualified person to water my cactuses when I leave town? You see, so this is a very different question, and I don't want dead cacti. San Pedro's take a lot of time to cultivate. There's lots of things you can do with them that are fun and exciting. So how do I know you have good reputation there? And the problem is reputation is referential. So you guys met me. we're talking. We'll have a great Q&A. Obviously, other people in the cryptocurrency space have different experience with me and different opinions about me. And if you go and talk to those people, they may think that I'm a completely different person and not qualified or very qualified, just depending upon their beliefs. So how do you then create a notion of a universal reputation metric that can be useful for making decisions about relationships? Should I give them money? Should I give them my kids to take care of? Should I go to this university? Should I do X, Y, and Z? All the time you're there. So reputation and identity are closely related to each other, and they can't be separated. Then you have user experience that sits on top. How do you issue and how do you revoke? How do you manage? And how does it work for 95-year-old grandma who's got emphysema? She's on oxygen, and all she can do is use her pinky to type and complain about the neighbor being too loud. And how does it work for the 11-year-old kid that basically has a cell phone lodged in their brain, and they live on TikTok 18 hours a day, and they're digital native? Okay, these two people, the spectrum, both would consume ideally a ubiquitous system. So we've built a lot of products like Atala Prism. We deployed it at scale in Africa and Ethiopia for academic credentials. We did a deployment for Dish, and we've been building out a corpus, and we've participated at the W3C and the DIF and the standards process. We've written a lot of papers about digital identity and the cryptography behind it. And obviously, as a blockchain vendor, we think that that's a trusted bulletin board. It's the perfect location to put an identity. So it's timestamped, it's immutable, it's irreversible. It's pretty good to put that change log there. But where identity gets useful is when you start binding it to products, assets, authorizations, authentications, attestations. And that's an intrinsically centralized thing because you get your degree from a university. You don't get your degree from a decentralized university. I would love to see that, and I think we need to move in that direction, but you get it from UC Berkeley or from Stanford or from the best ever CU Boulder. You get it from these things, okay? You don't get it from, the cloud. So you can have a completely decentralized identity system, but if they're unwilling or unable or for a regulatory reason can't sign, then you can't bring them into that space. So you have this mixture of federated, centralized, and decentralized capacities, and the whole concept of self-sovereign identity, which is where this leads to, is at least you own the credential, meaning that you control the private key and it's portable and it can flow from one system to the other. The agency, the legal agency, and the usefulness of that is a social conversation, and it's a very difficult one. And we go back and forth all the time. And I've gotten in fights with very prominent people over this. For example, Ron Revest at MIT. Ron has created RSA, was Adi Shamir and Leonard Adelman. And he wrote this paper on blockchain-based voting. It was a scathing critique, and we got in a big debate about it because I said, you are not being fair. And he said, well, you tell me a good digital identity system you guys have solved. Let's solve that before you even talk about voting, because you need to register people. I was like, okay, fair. Stupid Turing Award winner. So it's a great topic, and we have a lot of fun with it. And actually, companies like Google do contribute, and you guys have things, and as does Microsoft. Microsoft, for example, is a member of the Digital Identity Foundation, and they released a product called Ion. IBM is also part of that, and they've contributed to Hyperledger Indy. And it's a very beautiful space. There is regulatory urgency for this because there's a discussion of the translation from DeFi to Realfi. So there's a lot of question of how do you go from unregulated, completely anonymous DeFi to something that somebody somewhere will be comfortable with, but somehow still decentralized. This is the challenge of the industry. If left to the lawmakers' own devices, they'll just re-centralize everything and make Uniswap a bank and make them look like Coinbase or something. And that doesn't make any sense. So we have to solve the identity problem, and it's going to be the big challenge of this decade for the cryptocurrency movement. We've solved a lot of the scalability challenges. We have pretty good approaches for data availability, interoperability. We have pretty good ideas about governance. We're starting to converge to a level of gangly teenage maturity where we can mow the lawn. We may be passive aggressive and really shitty about it, but we'll do it. But we haven't got to the point where we really understand how to resolve the automated regulation. So basically automatic law, automated regulation, and regulated value transfer, and the handling of identity with blockchain systems. And that's going to be the next big protocol. Whoever solves that is big or bigger than Ethereum.
Interesting. Okay, that's cool. When I think about identity and all that as well, then I think about next privacy. So I think at ScottFest you kind of made a big announcement for for midnight, which would be privacy for transactions. Like, can you talk a little bit about that? Because that seems to be a scary subject for maybe regulators and some folks in the industry of actually having privacy, but at the same time, the community obviously needs to have some privacy. So how do you balance that all together and deliver something that can work for everybody, I guess?
It reminds me of that meme with Mark Zuckerberg and the kid, and the little kid's like, "Hey, my dad says that you're violating all of our privacy," and he looks back at the kid and he said, "It's not your dad."
So
That's the problem with the fangs, right? To do your thing and make your money, you have to know your customer. And the problem is your knowledge of the customer is so good that you probably know the girl's pregnant before the dad does. And let's be honest here, this is the algorithm-driven economy. And there's both a good side and a bad side. The good side is that you now get large language models and you get incredibly rich data science applications. And you actually can start talking about things on a social level that were impossible before. And you could find everything from systemic bias to potentially much better ways of micro-targeting for products. So that you don't waste advertising money. You're much more precise. You go from a hammer to a scalpel. That said, probably not okay that unregulated or pseudo-regulated private entities or publicly traded entities know more about us than the Central Intelligence Agency and the FBI combined. So how do you reconcile that? And so data privacy is a big one. And you see GDPR, you see a lot of these movements where they're trying to get some boundaries and understanding. And the issue first is that the lawmakers are too old. So we have to wait for them to die off and the next generation to come in. And these digital native next gen lawmakers will be able to do another DMCA or these types of things to help us navigate this. But the other thing is you need better technology. So you look at, for example, Brave and what they've been able to do, where their model is advertising, but they're trying to create a reality where you could micro-target without necessarily having Brave, the company, know who you are. And you can also have a business model where you cut in the consumer, the person who's the product, the user, into the ad revenue for use of their personally identifiable information. I own 6 companies. I'm known for crypto, but I also do biotechnology, and I have a healthcare clinic out in Gillette. We think all the time about, we have all this genomic data we're collecting for anti-aging and longevity. How do we actually mine these medical records, given HIPAA and these other things, and separate personally identifiable information? So Midnight was a research program that we started about 5 years ago. We created technology like Kachina, which is like, I can't believe it's not homomorphic encryption. So it allows you to operate on data without decrypting it and basically grok some value out of it. So private smart contracts. But then a whole bunch of other things to bring identity and data management in such a way that basically you could start solving some of these problems, like a search engine where you can micro-target people, but the engine doesn't know its user. Like an exchange where you can verify that the user is a US citizen, paid their taxes, and they're not on the OFAC list, but you actually don't know who they are. So there's a lot of complex cryptography that fits in there, a little bit of MPC and a little bit of zero knowledge cryptography and a lot of really careful thinking. But this is the next generation business model. And it gets me very excited because I think you can have your cake and eat it too. If you built it just the right way, you can preserve freedom of association, commerce, and expression, and you can create whistleblowing systems, underground newspapers, and other things to basically call truth to power, which is so necessary when you have large institutions that can become corrupt and too powerful to be held accountable. But at the same time, you can build systems that are self-regulating. And so Midnight is living on that fine edge of balance. And we've invented a lot of technology for it, and slowly we'll kind of work our way through. We also learned a lot. We moved our programming model from Plutus, which is Haskell, to TypeScript, a little bit more developer accessible. I'm shocked as you guys are, but there we go. And we also try to make it much more cross-chain. So Midnight's a partner chain of Cardano, so it gets infrastructure, liquidity, decentralization, and all these nice things, the ecosystem. But at the same time, it's a sidechain, so it can connect to Bitcoin and Ethereum and other things and kind of service all of them. And over time, we'll announce more and roll more out. And then my hope is to start talking about things like mining medical records without compromising privacy, and advertising models without compromising privacy, or regulated finance where we actually have DeFi that's regulated, but it doesn't get re-centralized like a bank or something like that. And that's the design space that Midnight lives in.
So basically, you're able to own your data, but rent it out at a profit, so to speak.
Exactly. And also, it can't be tied back to you. So
Right.
they won't know that Marlon is a cactus killer.
Yeah, I don't want that to get out. So thank you. Perfect.
Everybody already knows. You've been
Oh
doxxed.
no! Oh no! Okay, cool. That's great. That was a lot of fun. I appreciate your thoughts on that. Those are all like juicy subjects, and I don't think there's one answer, but I think everybody working together, we're going to figure something better out. So that's
Yeah.
cool. If we were to think about, what would be something that would be a priority for you in say the next 2 years, if you think about where Cardano is now, where it's going, just something that maybe you're super interested in or you think will change the universe. If you're able to share, I would love to think think about that with you.
So I think the most important thing is just getting SIP 1694 out. So governance, and getting it to a point where the ecosystem is really recursive. It's running itself and evolving itself. We've worked our way through all the eras, and we went from static and federated to dynamic and decentralized. We have programmability. Plutus obviously needs a few more iterations to get the DevX where it needs to go. So I kind of feel like Dart in the Polymer days. It's there's a lot of stuff you have to do to kind of work your way through this madness. But it's just very exciting because you have emergence. Once you actually get the system self-reinforcing and building upon itself, then you get to a situation where all the good ideas don't come from Charles or my inner circle or from universities. They come from the community, and it becomes a true open source program. And that is the kind of stuff that is sustainable and stable. It gets better, stronger, faster, cheaper over time, and it has its own treasury. Cardano, even in this bear market, still has $500 million of ADA just sitting around, ready to be spent on programs and things. It's really hard to kill an open source project with 3 million people, a decentralized government, and $500 million just laying around waiting to be spent for engineering and science. So adoption and governance, I think, are the big ones. And for me, I'd like to focus a lot more on these domain-specific problems like regulated DeFi and Realfi, and getting into Africa and doing end-to-end lending and for microfinance and identity products and our wallet lace and these types of things. These are the things that get me excited because those are products. These are approaches. These are new approaches. And being the steward of Cardano for 7 years, it's aged me horribly. I feel like Obama when he came out of office. He's got all the white hair. We're like, what happened to you, Matt? You used to be cool. He's like, I'm still cool. I'm still hip. It's the children who are wrong. So I feel pretty worn down, having been in that role for so long. And also, to be a true cryptocurrency, you need to get beyond that. So that's what I'd like to see over the next 2 years. And there's a lot of cool stuff. Input endorsers is super cool. A lot of cool new tech is coming. The sidechains revolution, all that stuff is great. And we'll be, of course, participants. And, we still have a fuck ton of engineers and scientists. They're not going anywhere. They're precious. We keep them in a basement. They're going to keep chipping away and, hammering away at this stuff. But now it's just a bigger club, and we're just a voice and a chorus.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to think about is the fact, the hit by bus theory. Like if someone gets hit by a bus, what happens next? And I think what you really focused on is trying to kind of turn over the reins to the community, to catalysts for voting and proposals and SIPs, the Cardano Improvement Protocol. That's just really how it should be. Because do you want to have one person who can get hit by the bus and then the chain is dead? Like actually Satoshi, think about that. We don't even know who Satoshi is, right? But that thing still lives on. Maybe not a lot of people have input on that, for example, differently than Cardano, but it still lives on. So I think that's a really key thing to think about. I would like to pull a thread there, though. You mentioned Realfi. It's kind of something that maybe some folks may not be fully aware of. Can we talk about?
Of course not, because we came up with the term. So why would you guys know?
Exactly. Well, I guess you'd have to watch all your AMAs to know. But
yeah.
in any case, I'd love to peel back that onion a little bit and kind of hear what you think about that and what that really means.
Oh, don't worry. Like $6 billion of great marketing, and you guys will all understand it. So DeFi goes to Realfi when you start adding standards and certification, identity, metadata, governance, and regulation. So take Uniswap and say, how do we start having identity? What type of metadata do we need to add in transactions? How do we standardize this so that it's interoperable with things and certified in a way so we know it has high quality and it doesn't get hacked? The protocol's been reviewed rigorously. Governance, in that there's a process to upgrade it that's independent of the founders, and there's you transcend a foundation and you're truly decentralized. And then once you have those conditions, regulation is an emergent property. So regulation comes out and says, okay, there's enough hooks here. It's probably sensible to figure out how to put this thing in a system where Germany's happy, US is happy, and other people are happy. So that's what we call Realfi, real finance. Okay, it actually works at scale for real people, and it's still decentralized. Now it's a balancing act, because every time you add one of these capabilities, you either slow down the development, you increase the overhead of running it, or you potentially centralize it. So you have to somehow resolve that design space. So you're mired in all this really difficult terrain. It's almost like Frodo with Schmigel and Sam, as they go through the swamp with all the bodies in it, and they're just tempting you to jump into the pool of centralization. You're literally living that life. So it's a very new concept, and it's something that I think is exciting, because you get to talk about new technology and new ways of doing things, just as exciting as smart contracts were. And it's something regulators can sink their teeth into. My problem is that I spent all of 2022 with a coalition of people. We got the Democrats and the Republicans to finally agree to something, and we were going to have a bill passed next year. I spoke before Congress, and then there was a lot of behind the scene things that we did. And there was a very good chance that the Biden executive order and the Stab Now bill plus the Lummis bill would kind of go into a room, have some sex, and their love child would come out. And that would be, what would be regulation, and we could live with it. Then somebody else had some sex, SBF, and apparently caused a lot of problems for us. So all that progress is gone, and we're going back to the drawing board, and nothing is going to get done, and we can't even get a damn speaker. So the regulatory reality is a bit challenging, and we have to innovate, and we'll innovate on the periphery in the developing world, places like Kenya, or emerging jurisdictions that want to get more political clout, like Dubai. And that'll give a roadmap for how do we pull this into the Western world, into Europe, and integrate it to MiCA, which has recently been pushed through but yet to be implemented, and what eventually ever comes from the Senate and Congress. Oh, how much we love them.
Gotcha. That kind of takes me in an interesting direction. I mean, you did pull the SBF card, so I think I'll ask about that. And my question around that would be, and you sort of answered a little bit, but how do we make the future better so that we don't have another SBF or Celsius or Voyager? Or, wait, all those things are connected. All right, never mind.
Yeah, they're all connected in the respect that they're centralized entities with centralized actors behind them. You see Elizabeth Warren and all these people run away, and they say, "How dare you evil crypto people do all this stuff?" And I'm like, okay, so let me get this straight. The people not doing crypto things that are replicating what Wall Street did failed because of centralized commitments and promises and lack of oversight. And you guys didn't do your job regulating them. And now your solution is to blame cryptocurrency. It's just so nuts. And you just listen to this garbage, and some of it is they're 80 years old and they have no fucking clue what's going on, and others just politics, and there's a little bit of everything there. And you just got to be patient. You just got to sit down, relax, take a chill pill, and just push forward. And every day's a new day. It's a new opportunity. So I try to stay as positive as I can, try to meditate. We're doing a lot of photobiomodulation and PEMF, and a lot of neural stim in addition to all of our meditation breathing techniques. So that helps us not go completely insane. But at the end of the rainbow, something will get done one way or the other. And it's a give and take, and you just have to accept it. And not always do you win, and not always do we get the good thing. Like I think back to Phil Zimmerman and PGP and Web of Trust. It's a vastly superior model for the web, but it didn't win. So we just have to accept the web as it is, not as we'd like it to be. I think about Google and its efforts with Quick. That's a Herculean effort, and it's because TCP/IP and UDP will never really change. It's locked in, and so you have to. Instead, we actually had a better technology called RINA, Recursive Internetwork Architecture. It's amazing and it's great, and no one will ever care about it. So you can live in fantasy land like the Free Software Foundation of Richard Stallman does, and the only way you can talk to him is through carrier pigeon, but it has to be an open source carrier pigeon under the appropriate license. Or you can live in the real world and try to win a game of inches, and that's what we do.
That's funny. That's funny. Some folks might be more new to crypto in the Web3 space, so I did want to touch on one last thing before we move on. And that would be the idea of what's the value of a chain. And I think the famous quote, if I remember, is prices are not correlated to the progress. So if we could peel that back a little bit, because I'm only in this for a few years, but in the beginning, I didn't quite understand that. Now I do, but I'd love to hear your perspective to maybe educate some folks who maybe are newer to the space and maybe don't understand that philosophy.
Imagine how shitty it is to be Jeff Bezos in 2000 and you have this catastrophic stock collapse and you have to wait 11 years for your stock to go back up to the all-time high from 2000. And during all those 11 years, you're like doing Alexa and Amazon Web Services, and you're building this massive AI company. You're selling basically every product. You're putting every mall in America out of business. You've become one of the best logistics companies since FedEx. And yet you match then the valuation that you had there. So no one can argue that the progress in 2011 is somehow comparable to the progress in 2000. It's an incomparable exponential growth of the company. And he wrote a memo about this and he talked about it. So the reality is that markets have a really difficult time with emerging technology pricing things appropriately, especially when you're talking about decentralized protocols that don't even have CEOs or companies. They're just protocols. Like, what would TCP/IP be valued at if there was a token for it?
Minus.
Yeah, or $1 trillion. It depends. Like, everybody uses it, right? So who knows? And it's surprised me what's achieved value. Where it's like a Nine Inch Nails song, a copy of a copy of a copy, where you have a copy of a copy of a copy of a protocol, and it's worth $10 billion in 2011. The NFT movement. Oh my God. The shit that I saw in 2021 was just crazy, and I was like, you guys aren't even buying the intellectual property. You don't own the picture. I'm going to right click to make a fucking point. And yet it's worth $1.6 million, and now it's worthless. So there's a lot of that, but the real value comes from community and vision. That's the real value. As long as you have adoption, growth, resilience, and evolution, you're always going to be relevant and stay around. David Bowie went through like 12 musical changes throughout his career, but he kept an audience. And as a result, David Bowie was David Bowie. And it's the same for the Rolling Stones. Their value is connected to the audience, the people using it. So you have to, not look at today, but you look at the factors of, does the community stay or go? Is it increasing or contracting? Is it engaged and actually evangelized? And do they do things or not? These are the factors that get you over the hill. And bull market, bear market, I've been through 6 of them. When I came in, Bitcoin was under $1. Then it went to 30, down to 4, up to 256, down to 80, up to 1,200, down to 400, set then to 250, up to 20,000, down to 4,000. Then it went to 69,000, all the way down to, 15, 16,000. Okay, so, and there's people lost money on all sides. I knew people that lost money when Bitcoin went from $600 to 69,000. It's just price discovery, and the markets are going to do that. And then the other problem is a lot of these markets are rigged and manipulated. There's a lot of wash trading, algorithmic trading that's in bots and trading against customers because of the fucked up nature of some of the exchanges, and a lot of pump and dumps, a lot of confidence scams. Every emerging market has that. People say, oh my God, crypto's so bad. It's like, okay, read a book. Look at 1870 when Standard Oil was formed and tell me about the oil and gas industry back then. Okay, these guys were dumping the waste gasoline and diesel from the refining process into rivers right next to the refinery because they had no consumption for it. They were just keeping the kerosene to replace whale oil. That was the lived experience. And every 6 months, the refinery would explode because they didn't have any safety protocols. We called it, going to a refinery. It meant you're going to your death. Okay, that's how that industry got started.
That's weird. I've heard that phrase before, but I didn't know what that meant. That's a little strange. Okay.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? and then you say, okay, look at the banking industry during the baronial age. It was so bad that in the 1907, the Knickerbocker crisis, J.P. Morgan had to bail out the U.S. government, led to the creation of the Federal Reserve System. Imagine a private citizen sitting in his den in New York being like, all right, I'm going to give you guys a bailout, U.S. government, but don't do it again. It's like the craziest fucking thing. Then again, in the 1920s, we have a ton of excess there, led to the Securities Exchange Act 1933 with the Great Depression. Then we had the aerospace industry in the 1950s. Huge growth. Oh, by the way, I missed the automobile industry. Another one, huge growth. Hundreds of car companies consolidated. Okay. Then we had the first wave of semiconductors. So the Fairchild era and Shockley Semiconductor, these types of things, the initial Silicon Valley, all that got swept away. Then you had the next Silicon Valley. And then you had the mainframe thing. And then suddenly the personal computer revolution, and then another. The clock ticks. And every step along the way, fraud, abuse, waste, scams, all these people. My God, during the dot-com era, you'd have guys come in and be like, we're going to put it on the web. And the VC guy would be like, yeah, this guy, he's got it figured out. Yeah, fuck yeah. And then some guy's like, well, what are we going to do on the web? You don't need to do anything on the web. You just put it on the web. We're going to make so much money. Okay, and they got SBF. Some bitch raised $200 million from Sequoia. Fucking Sequoia. They're supposed to give you a prostate exam if you ask them for money. And he's playing League of Legends, drinking Mountain Dew while he's giving the little pitch. And then he's like, I need you guys to make a decision today. And they're like, $200 million. Let's go. We'll be your round leader. And Theranos is another one. Okay, so people like to pick on crypto, but guys, we've been doing this under capitalism for 200 years. It's the price we pay for innovation. You don't know what you don't know, and you have to take some time to navigate the serpentine waters. Eventually you discover and you commoditize, and it becomes just another way of doing business and living life. And the 12,000 other attempts that could have won become Betamax, and they fall away, and you lose a lot. That's how it works. If you don't like it, then move to a different governance model, move to a different economic system. But as long as you have capitalism, you're going to have this boom bust cycle, and you're going to have innovators taking risks, not all of them being successful, but it gives you Google. It gives you the iPhone. It gives you Ethereum. It gives you Cardano. It gives you really cool, interesting things that eventually allow humanity to get better. And it makes the human condition better. And overall, it makes the world a better place if it's regulated appropriately.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's what a ride. And just wanted to say thank you, Charles, for joining the community here. It's been a wonderful time. I really enjoyed the opportunity, and I think our community enjoyed it as well. So thank you so much for making the time and stopping by here so we can hear your latest thoughts on everything. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. I wish we had more time.
Absolutely. Well, we'll stay in touch, and we can talk again in the future. All the best in the new year to you and your community. Look forward to seeing what happens next.
Cheers.
Cheers.